Hey, everybody. You are about to hear a brief retelling of the movie Danger Close, the Battle of Long Tan. Before we get started, hit the like button and subscribe. It may only be a click for you, but it has a significant impact on the channel. When war broke out between North and South Vietnam, Australia supported the South, as did the United States. Then, as the North fought with the support of the Soviet Union, Australia and New Zealand sent their own soldiers to fight North Vietnam. Among them were both conscripts and volunteers. The average age of the soldiers was 20 years old. One such soldier was Harry Smith. But unlike his fellow soldiers, Major Smith had undergone serious training. Despite this, he was put in charge of inexperienced yokels. Smith tormented them so much that the soldiers began to think he was avenging them. In fact, the major just wanted to prepare them for what they might face on the battlefield. One night, the Nui Dat military base is hit by Viet Cong mortar fire. Major Smith orders the men to take up positions, determine where the fire is coming from, and respond. The soldiers instantly obey his order, but there are some who behave relaxed, even under enemy fire. At this moment, Paul Large was sitting in the trench with the recruits, sipping foam from a can. He thought they were safe, and even started a conversation about music. Soon musicians would be coming to their unit with Little Petty. Large promised to introduce her to a fellow soldier, saying he knew her well. During the conversation, he accidentally fired his rifle and had to pretend he was shooting at the enemy, who disappeared into the woods. Having located the mortar formation, the Australian artillery opened fire and destroyed the enemy. The next day, Colonel Townsend assembles the officers to sound out the combat mission. He sends Bravo Company to investigate the rubber tree plantation at Long Tan from which the shelling of the previous night came. Major Smith asks that his company be sent on the mission. After all, he has more men and they are better trained. However, the colonel refuses him. Meanwhile, new soldiers arrive at the military base. They are immediately introduced to the course of action, making it clear that the major is not to be trifled with. He is trained with the commandos and received the best training, which means he will demand the appropriate zeal from his soldiers in training. At this point, Major Smith summons Large to see why he shot into the air last night. But Large sticks to his version of an escaped enemy. Smith has to use force to get Large to tell the truth. After that, Smith lets him go. After investigating the area, Bravo Company reports that the mortar squad that attacked the base last night has been destroyed. And there are no other military personnel here. Command decides to send Delta Company, commanded by Smith, to replace Bravo Company. Delta Company goes out the next morning. In the evening, Major Smith goes to Brigadier General David Jackson and asks to be transferred. He considers himself too good an officer to command young men. If he is given professional soldiers to command, he can develop as a military man. But Jackson refuses him. The next day, Little Petty arrives at the military base with musicians. Seeing her, Large asks her to kiss his buddy, Private Grimes, on the cheek to ease the hardships of service. Petty gladly complies with his request and then goes off to give a concert. Meanwhile, Delta Company is sent to Long Tan. They find footprints at the site of a destroyed mortar squad. To the north are footprints and to the east are furrows left by a wagon. Lieutenant Sharp's platoon is sent east. Before they leave, Smith demands that Sharp muster up and begin to behave like an officer. After traveling a long way, the 11th platoon encounters trouble. A firefight ensues and it turns out that the Vietnamese are very numerous and heavily armed. The colonel is informed about what happened and they go to coordinate the actions of Delta Company. Having learned that Sharp's platoon is in a serious mess, Major Smith sends the 10th platoon to their rescue. He also requests artillery support and Colonel Townsend, upon receiving the request, gives the go-ahead. However, neither artillery nor return fire stops the enemy. The Vietnamese are advancing in waves, not counting casualties. Many of the 11th platoon were killed, others wounded. The 10th platoon had been hit, too. When they approached Sharp's position, they were fired upon and their radios were damaged. Now they were out of contact. Lieutenant Sharp initiated the evacuation by flying away. Little Petty saw artillery shells exploding in the distance. The artillery managed to do its job and the enemy retreated, giving 11th platoon a chance to catch its breath. Shortly thereafter, the 10th platoon's communications officer comes to the remaining men of Delta Company. He tells them that the platoon has been left without communications. Large realizes that he must do something while the majors of the rest are idle. So he goes AWOL to find a safe route to 11th platoon. In the woods, he encounters two Vietnamese women dragging a wounded man. Upon seeing him, the women are startled but do not open fire. Large doesn't fire either, and they just split off in different directions. Meanwhile, 11th platoon is under attack from three sides. Sergeant Bouillard requests air support. Command contacts the Americans and they send planes. All they have to do is mark the spot where the shells are to be dropped. However, the smoke grenade does not work and the Americans have to attack blindly. They miss and fly off on another mission. Sergeant Bouillard then requests artillery support and calls fire on himself. This is necessary to push back the enemy or they will all be killed. Major Smith doubts whether to comply with his request, but then orders, open fire. The artillerymen fire on the 11th platoon's positions. After that, they lose contact with them. The base decides whether to send the armored personnel carriers to Long Tan. But the brigadier general realizes that in this case the base will remain undefended. He is sure that this is exactly what the enemy wants. The general believes that after the armored vehicles withdraw, they will be attacked and take over the base. Therefore, he orders to leave the APCs. Having found a dangerous path to the 11th platoon, Large returns to his own. He learns that the platoon is probably gone. Realizing that his fellow soldiers were killed because of the major's decision, he pounces on Smith with accusations. However, Smith is having a hard time without Large's attacks. So Large stops yelling at him. At this point, the company is attacked. Smith contacts his command and requests support. Jackson orders him to retreat. However, the major sends him far away and tells him that he will not return without the 11th platoon. He believes that some of them still survived and they must be rescued. Large reports that he has found a safe road to the platoon, and Smith orders 12th platoon to go with him. The major then sends a signalman with a radio to the 10th platoon. It is necessary to establish communication with them and adjust their actions. After that, Smith requests ammunition so they can continue to hold off the Viet Cong onslaught. But it's raining, and the general can't send the helicopters out in this weather. Despite this, the commanders of the two helicopters decide to fly on their own initiative. They load ammunition and grenades and head towards Delta Company. They are fired upon from the ground, but the pilots still manage to drop the ammunition. To mark the drop site, Smith orders a smoke grenade to be thrown. When the communications officer reaches the 10th platoon, they manage to contact Major Smith and he orders them to retreat. The platoon is still under fire and they have to withdraw. On the approach to the 11th platoon, Large and the others are ambushed. They are forced to fight a superior enemy force. Large is ordered to throw a smoke grenade in the direction of the hut near where the 11th platoon was. This way they will let them know that their own have come for them. After that, the rain stops and the enemy retreats. At that moment, Large sees the men of the 11th platoon, the survivors, coming out from the side of the hut. Hearing the good news, Colonel Townsend asks General Jackson to send Delta Company an armored personnel carrier. He is ready to go himself. The colonel thinks he will have time to help the company and get back to the base before it is attacked by the Vietnamese. Jackson is against it, however, and he orders the colonel to stay put. Despite this, he does send the APCs in. As the vehicles leave the base, Townsend asks for permission to check the perimeter. He contacts the commander on the armored personnel carrier and asks him to return one APC for him. He still decided to go to the rescue of Delta Company, loading onto the armored personnel carrier. Townsend ordered the others to wait for him, but the squad leader would not stop the convoy. He left only one vehicle to wait for the colonel, and while the commanders were settling their own affairs, the enemy retreated and Smith's men had a chance to catch their breath. The major beckoned Large over to him to talk. Smith liked the fellow, and they had even become friends. Large told him about his family and his fiancée, and the major showed him a picture with his wife and children. The respite was over, and a new onslaught of enemies began. There were too many, and Smith told them to conserve ammunition. He also requested artillery support. When the attack failed, the major ordered to fire as close as possible to the company's position. But the artillerymen struck very close, and Smith requested that the bombardment be stopped. When the battle was in full swing, Large rose to his full height to run to a new position and was killed by a shot to the head. Ammunition was running low, and there were few men left. So the soldiers drew their knives and prepared to fight hand to hand. At that moment, the long-awaited APCs arrived and drove the enemy away. All the soldiers, both alive and dead, were returned to the base. During this battle, 108 Australian and New Zealand soldiers held off the onslaught of more than 2,000 Northern Army soldiers. There were 18 Australian and 245 Vietnamese casualties.